All right, I am back. Took a little break and got some lunch. Figured it's a good time to continue. One thing I will note is I fixed a visual issue I was having for the first half of this. I had the focal length set to 200, which was causing this weird staircasey effect. I put it down to about 50, which is what it is by default, and it looks a lot better. I don't know why I did it that way, but I kind of messed up. So we'll continue on from there. Now I'm going to do a little bit of a pass on this to add a little more visual detail and visual interest and complexity to a lot of the parts. And hopefully make it a little more interesting. Because right now it's decent enough, but it's very blocky and there's not a lot of detail to the shapes. It's very square. And a lot of 40K stuff just looks like this, but if we're going to take, go through the business of 3D modeling this stuff for 3D printing, we might as well make it look pretty. And so here's that process. First thing I'm going to do, I want to add a bevel to this object up here. I'll have the bevel go in between. For some reason, it doesn't look good when applied down here. I can apply a generic bevel over the whole entire thing if I want. For some reason, it doesn't work here. Not quite sure why the cylinder is making it mess up, but it looks fine there. And so to do it, I also, instead of having it be applied evenly, because you see it's kind of overly applying right here, I just want it to apply to the edges. So to do that, I'm going to go to weight limitation. And now I'm actually going to manually specify the bevel weights by hitting N, applying a bevel weight here, and so forth. Just kind of repeat this process. Oops, sorry. Until we have the bevels applied where we want them. There we go. Nice and simple bevels. I'm going to change one thing here. I'm going to change this from a cylinder. Get rid of that. And I'm going to make it more of like an accessory rack, like where you might want to attach a top-mounted piece here. The way I'll do that is by showing you also how to make a array. It's a modifier. So I'll start with that little piece right there. Then I'm going to create a cylinder, and we're going to make it about 16 by 16. Move it up here. It's kind of small, but there we go. So you're probably wondering why I'm doing this, but it will make sense in just a second. So it wasn't super clear what I did there. I just, let me back up there to show you what I did. So I selected just those edges, and you can either extend it out this way or extrude out. I like to extrude, and that gives me this kind of cool cylinder shape here. I don't know what the correct term for this shape is. An oval, that's the right name. Then I can use this oval to cut here. It gives me this really kind of cool, interesting design. And I want this to repeat. Now, if I want to, I could just go in here and duplicate it, like so. Or a better way is to go to the modifier, have it be a part of an array, like so. That looks a lot cooler. There we go. It's kind of cool. Now let's add a little bit more visual interest here. Create another cube. Move it up here. Make this cube a little bit larger than this. Expand it over here. Select the whole entire thing. Move it up. Subtract it from there. Then make it mirror along the z-axis, so it cuts out on both sides. It's cutting off on the top and it's cutting off on the bottom. Now if we want, because we're just kind of cutting here, I might even see how this looks by scaling the top a little bit. I can do kind of like a little beveled thing like that. That's a really cool look, and it's kind of hard to do that by hand. So you can kind of like cheat a little bit with 3D printing, get this kind of cool effect. I don't know how practical it would really be for like an accessory holder, but that's one idea. Another idea for adding a little more visual interest. Oops. Let's add a loop cut this way. Go to face select. I can select this here and have it go up a little bit like that. Or what I was more thinking, scale this, extend it up a little bit like there. Gives me a nice little cool little like top rail piece right there. If I want to, I could probably even add some grooves to this, but we'll return to that once we add a little bit extra detail to the rest of the gun. Now, I also realized I tweaked the iron sights. I scaled it up a little bit earlier, and it made it not make any sense anymore. So I'll like to scale this down a little, so it makes a little more sense. Let's add a bevel to the iron sight as well. Weight based. I have to select both sides here because this part isn't mirrored. Ideally, it probably should be, but it's fine that it's not. Beveling just makes things look a little bit more realistic and manufactured rather than kind of blocky and simple. It's also a hard effect to do by hand with precision, so you can kind of utilize the advantages of 3D printing for that. There we go. It's a little more interesting visually on top. Now I want to make it look like all of these pieces up here aren't just floating, but like they are attached physically to the object. And one of the ways to do that is to have them have all these parts actually printed separately. That way they can be finished separately and then assembled like you would assemble a normal gun. So to do that, we are going to make copies of these objects and make a hole inside this larger gun piece here that these pieces will then actually insert into after we're done printing. To do that, I'm going to create a cube. Right here. Scale it up. Scale it to about the right size here. An important thing if you're ever doing any 3D printing, any pieces that would essentially attach into another piece or insert into another piece like this, is you want them to be a little bit larger. The hole to be larger than the peg. Hopefully that doesn't sound too dirty. But because when you 3D print stuff, they're not going to be 100% precise. It's going to be a little bit of variance in your print, and you don't want to spend all your time sanding out the inside of something so that a part will fit in there. There, that should line up pretty well. I'll use this to cut a hole right there. If I want to, I can make these the same size. I can have this actually. Let's do that. Have this go all the way to here. Select this here. extrude it all the way to there. And select these two sides. Hit extrude. Then scale them outwards. I don't know why I did that. Try this again. Scale them up so they're just a little above right there. Weird. For some reason this isn't slicing anymore. Let's figure out why this isn't doing that anymore. Oh, it is. I just couldn't see it. It's a little too narrow. So there it is. It's actually cutting there correctly. I just wasn't seeing it. So this would be nice if you print this out. Let's try this again. All right, so I did a little bit of backtracking here. I may have deleted that piece, but if I haven't, just go ahead and follow along here. I'm going to make this top piece, instead of making them 3 individual parts, I'm going to make them just one big, huge piece instead, or at least work as one big, huge piece in the end. To do that, I'm going to move this piece here and have this piece probably print separately. And actually that piece is fine right there. We'll combine those 2 parts. I'm going to move the base of this up here. Then I'm going to create a loop. There. Then we're going to select that right there. We're going to export it all the way across. So this is going to be just this whole entire top rail. It's going to be its own big, huge part, rather than a bunch of individual pieces. That'll actually look more interesting, I think. I think it makes more sense because that would be a pretty precise piece. Be right about there. And we'll move all this up here a little. Move that there. There we go. That's kind of cool looking. Make that about... That's fine there. That could probably all print all at the same time. So right now, one of the differences between modeling for just modeling for fun and modeling for 3D printing is there's a couple things to keep in mind is how something is going to be printed out. I'm envisioning this whole entire piece right here is printing out as one big piece. So it, in theory, would print this way. The lines would go up like this. And a thing I note to keep in mind is there's a few places there might be some slight problems. There might be some problems with detail right here because I'd have to have some support material right here, and the support material here would make this kind of a pain in the neck to clean out. However, because this is a nice even curve right here, if this instead prints this way, it'll get, these layers will actually print out like this, and I'll get nice clean edges, and I won't need any real support material because this here could actually go without any support material. However, I don't want to print this whole entire thing that way because I'll need support material here. So, bear with me here. I will probably have to cut this apart here and possibly even cut this right here because I don't want to have to deal with cleaning up support material that would normally go here. Or alternatively, I can print this piece like that, this piece here like that, and this piece here like that. So these two pieces could possibly be the same part, and this would be a second piece. Lots of writing, I know. It's kind of annoying. All right, we'll pop back in here. And so as I say, when you're modeling for 3D printing, as you're building something, you're going to start keeping things like that in mind of like, okay, how is this piece actually going to print? What kind of settings am I going to use? What's going to achieve the best quality? And how do I minimize support material? And all of those considerations are things that I think about when I'm making things, any kind of thing in a 3D printing program, any kind of 3D modeling. All right, let's, I feel pretty confident in that top part. I kind of like it. I'll probably go back and tweak it a little bit here in a minute. But for now, it looks good. So let's do something about the front. The front's going to be the same thing. I want these pieces to look like they're all kind of inserted in there. So probably want to add some detail to these parts. This thing here, I think this would be a bayonet holder. I think the bayonet would go here. Like I think you would possibly have a bayonet of some kind right here. Maybe with chainsaw blades on it, you know, like Warhammer always does. Something absurd. So let's make something that would actually hold a chainsaw blade or a sword blade or something with teeth on it. And I look at a few designs people have online, so I'm just going to kind of mimic those a little bit. You can kind of do it however you want. So I would think that something, when inserted on here, you wouldn't want to turn. That's why a curve wouldn't work that well. So I'm thinking like a peg, a square peg. And possibly with a groove, maybe a groove down the middle. So let's add a groove by adding a couple slices, scaling out from the middle. So to do this right here, I press scale and scale along the z-axis a little bit. Pop back over here and select the outsides. And export them out like that. It's kind of an interesting little piece there. That looks like it would be a thing that would hold a bayonet in place. And I also know, like, immediately by looking at this right here, when I'm going to be 3D printing this part, I'm going to want to 3D print it in this direction here, up and down. Because that'll be, layers will lay down like this, and that'll give me some nice strong layers. If I print it this way, like this, these little tips are going to be kind of weak and a little fragile. So I don't want that, especially if I want to add a bayonet attachment later. Now the bayonet would probably line up here and then actually attach right here. Let's make these a little bit larger. And while we're at it, let's add a hole where, in theory, a screw would go that would actually hold the bayonet in place. There we go. And we'll go ahead and bevel those edges while we're at it. Oops. We'll actually just do a proper bevel modifier. Wait. If you can do things with modifiers, I always recommend using a modifier. It's always going to look better. So also any bayonet's going to have to be mounted somewhere else. So let's add a little groove on here where the actual blade of the bayonet would probably rest. One of my favorite things about the Warhammer 40k universe is how there's a lot of canon in the way certain things look, as far as like designs, like kind of the basic shapes of the designs. But once you get down like the minutia of it, there's no real hard-coded specifics to anything. You can kind of sort of do whatever you want. It's kind of interesting that way. And I think that's one of the fun parts about the universe. So this is going to eventually be I'm going to use this to cut out of this right here and cut out of this right here. And so while we're at it, I'm just going to go ahead and add this piece to this piece right now. I think I'm just going to print this whole entire part as one big part rather than have multiple smaller pieces. I was considering having them print separately, but I think just combining them might make a little more sense. Possibly. Yeah, let's do that. So to do that, I'm going to click this here, then hit Control plus, add them together. Now it's just one big huge part. Now I can take this smaller piece here, select the larger one, Control minus, cut it out. That looks like a good spot for a bayonet. Now I want to add some bevels to this smaller piece here, so I can actually select it. The cool thing is because it's just being added, I haven't actually changed anything. Let's add I don't know what that's there for. Let's add a bevel modifier. Under bevel, weight. There we go. And we could, if we decide to make a bevel here, we can go and tweak that a little bit later, or just make that a part of the, some edits there to that. But I won't worry about it for now. Now we need to have a place for this to insert into here. Move this forward a little. So I decided a while back I want to make this actually be able to remove this eventually. Very cool to have this be a single thing that could just be selected and unselected. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I want the magazine to be removable. Why is it inheriting? I don't want to have to redo all the lines in there. It's slightly over selecting. Sorry, I'm trying to be precise here. So annoyingly, it's not really inheriting the selections here, but that's okay. We'll just go ahead and change all these here. Select those, add some creases. There we go. So that's the transform I put up to, I moved it up there just to take a look at it. So I'm going to pop it back down there. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now let's cut a hole in the gun itself. We're going to add a mesh, a cube, scale that cube up to the size we want it to be. Right there. And there we go. Now, if we want to make it a little more visually interesting, we could do another cut there. A larger cube and add a little bit of bevel to that edge, but I think this looks okay. The one thing I'm not really happy about is there's not much space between this here and this here. So I may tweak this part here just a tad. There we go. So I'm going to shift that over just a little bit. Pop over here. Same thing. There's a place for that to insert. Now I want this to also be attached to this here, but I think I'm going to have these parts print separately because I want to be able to print this from here up, and I don't want to have any support material on here, so I might have this part print separately and then attach. So I'll have to figure out how that's going to work here in a second. Although it might just be easier to have it be one big piece and remove some support material. We'll work on that in a minute. It's just a little mistake here. It's a little too much space here, so I'm going to slide this up. There we go. All right, let's work on the other side for a second. Now, since a bolter is it's a shell-based weapon, I want to flip to the other side, and I'm trying to figure out why it's not just mirroring. There we go. All right, we'll work upside down. That's fine. So to get to this view, I'm just hitting the 7 and 9 keys. We'll work upside down. All right, so for the ejector, it should, in theory, from my extensive knowledge of firearms, it should be, I believe, right above where the magazine goes in, because the bullet should go into here, fire out through here, and then eject up the top of the gun. And the ejection should be about the same size as the bullets. So in theory, you would assume the bullets are that large, maybe that tall, for this lovely 6-round clip that this clearly has. Maybe that big. That looks good. Now, if we want to, we could do something kind of cool. We could have some internal mechanisms kind of showing through here, so you could actually see a little bit of stuff in there. But that might just be a little bit too confusing. Again, as I say, Warhammer 40k guns don't actually make any real life sense. They're kind of a mess. So we'll cut a little hole out of that right there. How about there? There we go. Let me try to change something really quick here. See if I can find ambient occlusion for the viewport. There's got to be a way. Well, it used to be in there. You used to be able to add a little bit of ambient occlusion for the viewports. You can see the grooves a little bit better. But for some reason, it's not really showing up, which is a little annoying. And we can tweak this a little bit, but it doesn't quite look the same. Oops, so there we have that. And we'll have it be just by default. We'll have it be closed. So let's create another cube. Let's say cubes and cylinders are 90% of hard surface modeling. Hopefully we'll get into something a little more interesting in a later video. So the big thing here is I want this to actually look like it's a separate piece and not just a simple groove in the object. So I want this to be actually a part that I'm going to print separately and then insert into the finished part. Like that. Make it a little smaller. So it's actually kind of indented into the object. Just scaling it down. There we go. And this will kind of pop up there. So now realizing this doesn't make any sense because it should slide this way, so let's rotate it around. Because in theory this will slide back, the round will eject, and this will slide forward again. So if you want to apply a little logic when it's all the way open, with this right here, this should be the size of the bullet, which that seems about right. Close enough. We can make it a little larger if we want, just by changing this. I want this to be just slightly smaller than the overall piece here. And if you want, you could even add a little bit of a groove in here, so it's actually, you can actually see it inserted in there, and it's not just floating. That might not be a bad thing to add, but I'm not going to super worry about that right now. All right, next is add a little more interest to the slide here, this little slidey thing. As I say, I don't know guns very well, so I don't know what the actual term for it is. How about something like this? There we go. That looks interesting. And we can go back here and add a little bit more to that in a bit. That's totally fine. But that should make some kind of sense as far as a gun would be. I mean, there's probably a lot of reality to it as far as, like, I think there'd be a spring here. Who knows? I don't know anything about guns. It's Warhammer 40k. Doesn't matter. All right, so I want to try something here and consider this part a little bit of an experiment. Well, first of all, I'm going to get rid of this empty. I'll just unselect it. That's just the background image since not really following it anymore. Kind of gone off my own ideas here. Oops. I'm going to try something with this grip. This is going to be a little bit of an experiment. but I want to have it have kind of a cubic structure. So to do that, I'm going to create a cube, make it about that large, and move it over here. And we're going to create a three-dimensional array with this cube by adding an array modifier, like so. Then adding a second array modifier. The second array modifier will be on the y-axis, like so. And it's going to have the same value as the other one, 1.2. We'll do 1.3, make it a little bit more space. Then add a third array modifier on the z-axis. Let's check it out. This way I can scale it up as much as I need, like so. And I'm going to do a tiny, tiny experiment. I'm going to duplicate this, move it over the top, rotate this down. Hopefully this will make sense what I'm doing here in a second. There we go. Right there. Just realized I need to have this be squared on this axis here. It's a little off. It should be about, that should be about right. Now I'm going to use a set of Boolean modifiers to modify these squares. And to do so, I am going to duplicate this again. Then I'm going to scale it up slightly. Then I'm going to keep, while I saw that selected, I'm going to select this grid, do Control minus, then reselect that grid, and do an intersection. There we go. So you can kind of see what I'm trying to accomplish here. As I say, this is kind of an experiment, and I don't know what it's going to quite look like. So I got kind of an interesting effect here, I think. There we go. I think that looks kind of cool. What do you guys think? How about right there? It's a cool effect. Then we'll move this into here, like so. So I want these squares to look like they're kind of floating on top of the object. It's kind of an interesting look. I don't know what you guys think. Might be an interesting option for that over there. Maybe a slightly more interesting grip. Huh. I know, it's kind of boring. I'm just sitting here staring at this thing, trying to figure out if I like the look or not. The cool thing is I can just kind of keep it over here for now and make a decision about it later. That's a little experiment I wanted to do. Another option is you can actually use the scene here. Something I haven't done yet is much organization to my scene. And so I'm starting to think right now would be a good time to do some organization. So under scene collection, I'm going to create a folder, aka a collection. I'm going to call this the gun. And let's start off by putting everything in there. So select it all. Let's do it this way. Hit move it all into the gun. Now I'm going to create a new collection called Modifiers. And modifiers are going to be anything like that's just this blank square. Move, take this, move it to here, take this, move it to here, let's move it to there. So you're probably wondering, why am I doing this? Because it lets me do this. Lets me view my object as a single piece without seeing all these modifiers kind of cluttering it up. If I want to see them, I can just reselect it and they all show up again. And you can even break these collections down to each individual part. I could have just the grip pieces all be by themselves. I could have the gun pieces by themselves, just the clip by itself. And so I might end up actually breaking things down more in the future, but for now I'm not going to worry about it. All right. Now as I'm looking at some of these gun designs online, I think this is supposed to be like a exhaust vent of some kind. Some modelers have it as an exhaust, some modelers have it like as a extra dial. As I say, it's probably just some doodad by the artist that it's probably in some canon now. That's the way it is. But I think we're looking pretty good. Now let's make this look like it's a little bit more, let's add a little bit more detail to it. Maybe see how it looks with some metal pieces kind of hammered into it. Probably thinking, what do you mean by metal pieces hammered into it? Extrude these up. I think it looks okay flat like that. I'm gonna do a quick thing. Be right back. I'm gonna look at some more concept art and some more pictures to get some ideas about where to go next. If I ever get stuck, that's what I do. Just go look for more pictures, look what other people have done, and just kind of get some inspiration. So I will be right back. All right, now for the final bits of the modeling. I took a little break here to kind of get some more ideas about where to take some of the parts. And I think I have some good ideas for what to do here. So we'll just start from the very front here. I want to make it so the barrel looks like it's actually inserted into here and not just kind of welded to the front. So to do that, I'm going to create a cylinder. Move it up to here. Scale it. Rotate it around. Like so. Make sure it sort of lines up with this here. Cut a hole in there right there. You notice the cylinder, it's got a low poly. Now to increase that poly count, we'll just add a modifier to it. Subdivision. Add a crease. Now it's nice and smooth. Just like that. We can also use this, we can also fake a bevel using that cylinder. By going to here, scale it up a little bit, select it, extrude, scale it down, extrude again. And that should give the appearance of a slight beveling to that surface. It's not really showing up that well, so we'll move the beveling here. Just like that. Now, you see it? There we go. There's some beveling right there. Next thing I want to do is scale this. I selected the outside piece here, the inside piece here, and I'm going to hit S to scale them. Scale them to 0 so they're both lined up at the same point. Go to here because I know I'm going to print this way. So I don't actually need that base piece there. So what I'm doing here, select this, hit W, and let's see if it's in the same place. Loop Tools, Bridge. There we go. Nice little barrel. Now, one thing that's kind of annoying is that I know for a fact, because this is going to be put in here, I'm going to want it to line up correctly and not be like rotated incorrectly, which is going to be really irritating. So I'll add some slight grooves in here. This is kind of a little advanced technique. Add a couple of grooves in here so when this thing actually goes in here, it'll line up correctly. And there's a few ways to do that. You can kind of do something like this, sort of, where it's like a little bit of a bump on top, or add a groove to the very top up here. But we'll probably have to get to that in just a second. I'm not going to worry about it right now, though. Scale this down a little bit. Add a subdivision to it. So I believe this is supposed to be like a laser sight. That's what it seems to be a lot of artists kind of render it as. There we are. And we're also going to want a hole in this here at the same size. We can actually just take this here, hit Control D, scale this up. So what I did there is I just selected the parts I don't want, hit F, and it rebuilds the face so it's flat. And there we go. That'll be a little hole up there that this piece can kind of insert into for like a little laser sight. And in theory, also, I could probably make this hollow, so you can actually probably put some kind of actual electronics in there. Would be kind of cool. But that's going to be, if I ever do an electronics video, that's going to be an entirely separate thing. There we go. A little beveling on it. Let's move these up a little. Right there, it looks good. All right. I think that's starting to look pretty visually interesting. Let's add a little bit of more interest to this piece right here, because I think it's a little flat looking still. And to do that, I think I'm actually going to edit my modifiers. Now for the modifiers, unfortunately with the modifiers, when you use the bool tool, it reduces these modifiers down to like these really flat surfaces. Or these, like, it goes to the bounds, so you can't see them anymore. If you want to be able to see them again, I believe the setting is under... So I say they changed everything in the new version of Blender, so it's a little harder to find. You can have it so it shows up again. Bear with me here as I track it down. Nope. Viewport display. Display as bounds. Let's make it solid. There we go. So I'm going to add a little more detail to this piece right here. Especially as it relates to this up here. So let's do that. Let's add a cube. We'll add some just basic lines to this. Something like that. Where it would be there, or maybe right there. Let's try to see what this looks like. Often when I'm making stuff for myself or kind of interpreting things, I kind of just experiment a little bit and see how I like stuff. And if I like it, then I keep it. If I don't like it, then I just discard it. It's an interesting little groove. Adds a little more visual interest to the gun. Makes it a little bit more precise. One of the advantages of 3D printing is you can have these really complicated designs kind of with you, and without having to really work on it a lot more, as far as like a lot of fine-tuning at the after stages. That didn't make any sense at all, sorry. Here, let's have it go out to here, extrude out to here. There we go. That's kind of cool looking. All right, we're at the point we should probably apply the location. Wait. Very annoyingly, I have not labeled anything, so I'm having a little trouble finding stuff sometimes. I want to apply this thing's location and its rotation and its scale. And plot down to its modifiers. And do a mirror modifier on the Z-axis, like so. As I select this little piece here, I want it to clip to here, and then I want to delete that square in the middle. That's kind of cool looking, actually. Adds a little extra. It's visually kind of interesting. Makes it look like it's assembled out of multiple smaller pieces, as opposed to just being one big, huge, complicated thing. Let's add one more. Whoops. If I want, I could be a lot more precise with this, but I don't think it's going to matter that much in the long term. If it is. So I'm not sure how I feel about this extra line right here. Might look pretty good if I add one here, though. It's my favorite part of actually 3D modeling, where I can kind of go off book and experiment a little bit. You can come up with some really interesting ideas. There we go. That's kind of interesting. It's totally optional. You can include it or not. I think it adds a little bit of visual interest to the piece. All right, let's do something about this rear cylinder piece. So I think this would be like, say, where a stock could potentially attach, like, or some kind of like rear attachment of some kind. We'll keep it as a cylinder for now. Crease those. Duplicate it. Expand it slightly. subtract it out. Here's a little cool thing here is that one of the advantages of 3D printing is building a shape like this where you have like a curve like that, like a circle with like this little groove. That's going to be kind of tricky to do by hand. I mean, it's still doable, but it's a little tricky. And so it's one of the cool things about 3D printing is that you can achieve some of these things that you wouldn't normally see in a prop just because of the power and capability of a 3D printer. So if you're going to 3D print something, you might as well show off your work a little bit. There we go. I kind of like the look of that. Maybe make this a little bigger. To there. Expand this out. That's kind of cool. All right, we're getting pretty close to being done. One thing I wanted to change, I wasn't really happy with this piece right here because it doesn't really match the rest of the design. It's kind of slick and curved. It kind of matches this, but it doesn't match a lot of the guns. So I want to kind of add a little bit more interest to it. Perhaps add a bevel of some kind. Not sure if the bevel modifier is going to behave with it. It's not doing a great job. Yeah, bevel modifier does not like subdivisions that much. So what we'll do is we'll actually just apply this subdivision. Like so. And here's a little trick I do to all these lines here are all the same. I don't really need the do a bridge. It'll actually erase a lot of that and simplify your model a little. Makes it a little simpler to work with. There we go. Do an export and a scale, extrude into scale. Add a quick little bevel to that piece right there. It's just a touch of something to make it a little bit more visually interesting as opposed to just being this kind of flat piece. As I say, I might actually try to go through here and add a skull to the base of this because skulls are cool. Okay, finally, last and best part is to add some bolts. Or actually, let's do one more thing before we add bolts. So these knobs are going to go in here. That's right, I said knob. So let's figure out how big it's going to be first. How big the knob is going to be. I'm 5 years old. Right there. Let's have it look like that. That'll actually connect in there. So we can add another cylinder. But here's another little trick. Duplicate this. Then go delete the parts you don't want. Which just leaves that base. Scale it up. Extrude out. Like so. And subtract from the object. So there we go. Got a nice little place for this to insert in here. And this is also a perfect place to add a mechanism of some kind. You could probably make a mechanism so this would actually rotate. Actually be really cool. You could add a screw to it. It'd almost be that simple. And it's kind of cool to have props that you can actually kind of adjust things on and change things. It kind of it really adds a lot to your finished piece. For this here, I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to make a fan out of it. The other thing I want to do is I want to make it so this here is actually beveled. So we're going to have to go backwards a little bit and take care of that. So we got to figure out which one of these modifiers is that one. You can actually just unselect them like this or label them correctly. That helps a lot also. But I'm actually just going to apply this modifier. Wait, not going to apply the modifier just yet. Let me find that modifier. Modifier to be through the whole object. Now it's apply it. And there it is. So I applied it, but it didn't quite apply very well. So apologize if you're following along. That was a little confusing. So I'm going to do a little thing here. See all the vertices? We're going to kind of rebuild this part a little bit by selecting all of these vertices, except for this edge here. We're going to hit E to extrude downward until it hits the ground, like so. Select this here, hit F to fill, select this here, hit F to fill. And there it is. And it cleared off all of our bevel weights, which is really, really annoying. But that's luckily pretty easy to re-add. Getting kind of a little frustrated here. For some reason, it's not beveling like it's supposed to. Not sure why it's not working. Well, because it's not working, I'm going to get rid of the bevel modifier, and we're just going to do it manually. I don't know why it's not working. Might have some issues with some of the compound curves, but that's fine. We'll just do it manually. So I'm just going to select all of these vertices at the same time, like so. There and there. And we'll do those ones also. Hit W, bevel the edges, just like that. That's why the beveling's not working. We're going to back up here just a second. I think it's having some trouble with this angle right here. So whenever you do these like cuts, you'll notice there's some little glitches that kind of appear in your object. And so sometimes you have to kind of go through and do some manual corrections to your finished piece. Like that. That may not look like much, but I feel somewhat confident that might fix my bevel issue. There it goes. Yep. That solved the bevel issue. It just has a problem with this weird little curve here not being the way it likes. I think because a lot of 3D programs, they really like squares and triangles. If you get outside of that, it starts to kind of give you some weird behavior. And that was just giving me some strange behavior because it wasn't following that anymore. So sometimes it's not a bad idea to apply a modifier and then kind of go through and kind of manually correct some of those annoying issues. All right, so let's bevel these two also. We'll bevel these as well. There we go. That looks pretty cool. Bevels just make things look a lot more professional, a lot sharper. Highly recommend them if you can add as many as you can. Really brings out the eyes in your piece. Add another cylinder. So I added a cylinder and I couldn't figure out where it was. It's because it actually went into the modifiers here. So you want to make sure that you have the right scene selected when you add a object. All right, delete that. make it 32. This video is at least an hour longer than I was hoping it would be, but that is fine with me. If you're still listening, I would be surprised. There we go. Little groove. The location's off, so let's apply the location and scale, then mirror that object on the Z-axis so it shows up down there. Let's make it larger also. Adding a lot of visual, like physical depth in your objects like this really brings a lot out in it. And while we're at it, I want to duplicate this transform, or this modifier. Move it over here. So I want to do the same thing right here. To add that there. And maybe we'll add a few little dashes to it also. See, I don't want it to mirror. I just want it to be right there. All right, now that we have this little thing here, let's build a little fan. And a fan would be kind of cool because it lets me show you a couple little tricks. That'll be the center of the fan. So there's a few ways to do this, but I kind of prefer the rough and dirty way. We'll do it the very ugly way. I'm going to delete this and redo it with, we'll make a 12-bladed fan. We'll see why that makes sense here in a second. Select all the sides, Alt-E to extrude individual faces. Scale them out. More. I don't like the way that looks. Let's do it one more time. 24 this time, and I'll show you why that. Now I'll show you why that makes sense. I haven't talked this much in a while. I don't know how people do this streaming stuff where they do like 6 hours of it. Sounds like it would break your throat. But people do it. Extrude out. Scale it. So I don't like the way that looks. There we go. There we go. Scale the bottom half so it's at 0. There we go. We have a little fan here. Now fan blades shouldn't be just straight up and down. Here's a cool little trick you can do to kind of skew them. Select just the top and rotate. There's your fans. That should fit right there. And you will print those out separately. Let's move these here to our modifiers. Save it again. And for this over here, you're just going to print out a duplicate of it. A little trick here, if you want, is if you hit Control D, it creates a duplicate of your object. This is each object is actually separate. If you click Alt D, this creates a duplicate of your object in such a way that if you modify one of them, like say, oh, here we go, add a hole in the center, it modifies both of them at the same time, which is really, really cool. So these are the same object, just a different duplication of it. And these duplications will inherit the object's edits, but not its transforms or any kind of operations you add to it. So if I scale this up like that, for some reason, it's not going to change it. But if I go in here and scale it up, it will change it like that. They're both to change accordingly. I want it to look like, yeah, there we go. That looks kind of cool. All right, what's next? Let's add some, let's do some more with the grip here. The grip's kind of boring. Now we've added a lot of detail in other places. Again, with the grip, it's probably not going to look good with some of the modifications we've made. So let's go, I'm going to go back to this idea over here. I think I had a thought that might work. This might look better if it's scaled more. Only problem is we're running dangerously close to the point where like a 3D print won't, you only get so much visual information from 3D printing. Even the best 3D printers aren't going to give you as crisp of a thing as a resolution as you might want. Whoa. And Blender freaked out there for a second. Remember to save often. That's kind of cool looking, I think. No. That's off its Z-axis slightly. So that's an interesting look. That might work. But I'm starting to think that detail is going to be kind of lost on a 3D print, so I'm going to abandon that experiment and just focus on this as a little bit more of a simple object. I'm going to take a cube. We're going to add some grooves to this with an array. Create about 4 squares there. Subtract that from that. Plop back into here. Duplicate this. Remove that part and scale it down a little. It's going to require a little bit of fine-tuning to kind of find a middle ground between these pieces, but there you have like it's kind of these like loops around there. It's kind of cool looking. That's a visually interesting look. I also have it just go part of the way through there. Kind of seeing how this looks. Don't really like the way that looks either. I'm gonna say often you're kind of like a lot of 3D modeling, you're kind of exploring, looking for something that looks kind of cool, and some stuff just doesn't really pan out. We'll try the same idea, but do it in a slightly different way. Extrude here. Scale it that way. I think that looks more interesting. There we go. And that way these kind of line up a little bit with where those are at. Where these kind of, where it kind of dips in a little bit. That looks a little bit more interesting, a little bit better. Do the same thing, duplicate it, scale it down a little, shift it back a touch, maybe here. This is kind of my favorite part of modeling, when you're just kind of like, as I said before, you're searching for the story of your object, the story of your piece. This is almost your Bob Ross moment, where you're figuring out, okay, how do these things fit together? Why do they fit together this way? Why does it work this way? In many ways, I think it's my favorite. It's easily my favorite part of the whole process. Go bring that up there. There we go. That looks kind of cool. Excellent. Still not 100% of this grip. Still not speaking to me the way I want it to. There. I like that a little bit better. I'm going to do one thing here. I'm going to apply this array so I can then make the middle one a little bit longer, like so. That actually gives me an idea, because I was going to make this an Inquisitor's gun, so I thought I might put a little eye here and have this be reminiscent of the Inquisitor's design. But I will worry about that later when I add some more details. All right, what is next? What is next? I'm going to add the bottom of this here. So it's actually possible to make this slider actually work, but as I always say, adding a mechanism to anything is just a recipe for a pain in the neck. So I'm actually going to make this be two separate pieces. Again, it's one of those things that makes sense if you've done a lot of 3D printing. This will be the actual part of the slider that goes in here. I want it to stick up just a little bit. Like, say, that much. Scale it to roughly, how about there? That's fine. So this here will then glue into the back of this. And I'd rather have this piece print out as one part pretty easily, or two separate pieces. Actually, before I delete it, I think I'm just going to make it a single piece. A little bit simpler. It'll still print just fine. There we go. Easy. So if when so I'm also right now, I'm thinking ahead a little bit to when I print this. I want to print this way. So this is going to be the Z-axis on the print. So the detail is going to be like this, and there shouldn't have to be any support material in it. And this is pretty flat here. Let's add a little more detail. Just some slight details here. Make a happy little slider. Go down here and add a little bit more. I want to add a little line around this edge right here to make this a little less sharp. And I will do that by finding the modifier here, duplicating it. Oops, sorry. I want to duplicate the entire modifier, not just part of it. Scale it up just a little bit, like so. Like that. That's a cool and very simple effect. Should we do it that way? Flatten this out here. How about like that? I think that looks kind of cool. Mirror it on the Z-axis so it applies to both sides. I got this very cool, very simple little effect. Move that to modifiers. So got the barrel. Got this. I want to make this here a place for this to insert. So a little trick here you can do if you want to just duplicate something size without having to create a new object. Actually, it's just easier to create a cube for this. Ignore that. I think we're actually pretty close to being done. Not a lot left to do, except for the fun part. Add some bolts and a logo of some kind. Now there is a bolt factory in Blender, but you don't really need it. It's a little overcomplicated. Best thing to do is just add some cylinders. Add a, say, a 6-sided bolt like so. All it is a cylinder. You can also just have bolts externally and glue them in there accordingly. You can buy bolts and just have holes in your object and then just use like actual screws to assemble everything. You could in theory make it so it doesn't need any glue at all. You just use bolts for all the different pieces. Before I forget this, add some visual interest here. Now it's a little more complicated looking, a little cooler looking. So you can have a bolt, you can even have a screw if you want. Screws are pretty simple, kind of the same thing. Extrude it here, but you want to have a kind of groove going through it, so just select those, delete them. F to fill those in, F to fill those in, F to fill that in, fill, fill. Now look, we've got a little bolt. Let's try that, or a little screw, sorry. So in theory, you'd put these wherever they logically made sense. Kind of like the places where your gun would actually assemble. Say here. 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 There. There. Probably a few places right here. Those would probably be where the this piece would connect in here, and these would kind of help attach it. I like having them be kind of big. Makes it look kind of a little more badass looking. You can have bolts be different sizes, but I wouldn't do more than 2 sizes for the thing. Otherwise, it looks kind of cluttered rather than looking kind of detailed. Let me put a couple in the grip here. Now you notice I'm not really applying these. I'm just kind of like laying them on here for now. That's because I haven't really... I'm actually going to go through and cut a hole where all these are going to be. Then I'm going to print all these bolts separately and then glue them on afterwards. It's going to make the entire sanding process a lot simpler if I do it that way. I'm actually going to get rid of that one. And that one maybe. Oops. Or should I just leave it there? Nah, I think it looks kind of cool there. All right, now let's make a little hole for the bolts to go into. Our screw hole. So I'm going to duplicate this. Highlight the top of it. F to replace it. Scale it up a little bit. Move it back down. Control negative. There we have a little hole. Now, if I want to add a little bevel to these, it's actually really, it's again, like it's really simple. Scale these to here. Like that. That looks really cool. Now, I'm not actually duplicating these. I'm not making a new hole for each one. This is all the exact same object. So these are all the same thing here. Add modifier mirror, Z-axis again, so the hole appears on both sides. Same thing with this, Z-axis. Oh, it's because I haven't applied it yet. Duh. There we go. Almost done. These ones are going to be at a slight angle, so rotate it a little bit. So I need to be a little bit deeper because it's at an angle. That's what she said. Sorry, 5 years old. That looks pretty good. So it's kind of at a funky angle, but that looks kind of cool. Duplicate it over here. There we go. All right, I'm still not super happy with the grip yet. Let's smooth this out right here. Turn our modifiers on again. Add a subdivision to it. Oops. There, it's a lot smoother now. There we go. All right, let's do something fun with the bottom right here, rather than have it be totally flat. I think it looks kind of boring. Make a little thing you can scratch your finger on it. There we go. It's kind of cool looking. Gives it a little, makes it a little bit more interesting visually. May not serve any actual purpose, but helps contrast a little. You can actually copy those up here. If we want, nah, I'll leave that off here. All right, now for the next modifier, and I believe the final modifier we are going to have to do. Now that we're approaching, I think, hour 2. Might as well get this out of the way. We're going to make it so the looks like the grip can actually insert into here. Before I do that, I'm going to add a little bit more visual interest to this grip piece right here. I guess I could just leave it flat. Nah, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Select those, extrude it out, scale it down. There we go. A little cooler looking. A little more interesting. Control J will join objects together into one. There, now everyone's going to ask you if it's a Nerf gun modification. All right. So our modeling is actually now done. All right, now let's finish this up. I'll make a few more changes to the model, and then we're going to start cutting it up for 3D printing. A few things I'm not happy with. I'm not really happy with this back piece yet. I don't really know what to do with it, so I'll probably just make some little detail piece out of it. And I want to make some kind of logo to go on here also. But first thing I want to change is I want to simplify this up here a little bit. I want to have it just be 3 or 4 instead of having a whole bunch. A few things I want to do also is add another subdivision to this to smooth it out. I'm also still not really happy with this part here. I think I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to get rid of these here. I don't like the way they look. And I still am not super happy with this part here. I just don't think these right here look that good there. So, but I'll leave it for now. And okay. Now I want to make it so if I print out this part right here, I can easily attach it to the rest of it. So at this point, I'm also starting to think about how I'm going to slice this object up into smaller pieces so I can put it on my printer. So I think in terms of, okay, how big is my printer? And the size of my printer is going to make a big difference in how I can print all these pieces out. And luckily, I personally have a large printer. It's about 250 by 250 by 250, which if I click over here on the dimensions, means I should probably be able to print this thing in 1 or 2 parts. I'm probably going to split it in half right here, though. So I might as well start thinking about how I'm going to do the final assembly. And let's start with this piece right here. I want to have this here extend up a little bit. So I'm just going to extrude it to about, let's say here. Crease that. That way the whole entire thing should just slide into place. There we go. In the front here, this can actually just be flush. It doesn't need to insert in there if it doesn't want to. The big part here is also got to think about how it's actually going to slide in there. Like this, or if it's going to go in at an angle. We'll probably, actually going in an angle might work, so probably extend this a little here. The reason why I do that is that this will actually look like it's two separate pieces rather than just a single solid piece after it's all printed out. We're going to add another cube, like usual. Scale it up. So it's going to fit right here. Scale to there. And scale to there. Use that to cut out there. Just like that. Now it's cutting off this right here a little bit, but I don't know. I think that's kind of an interesting look. I don't think that's going to bother me too much if it's like there. I don't even what it'll look like if I do this. Kind of like that, actually. Maybe I'll do something interesting with this right here. Just add one more piece of something to kind of attach back there. All right, I can even have this slide back here with something. Yeah, let's do that. It might look interesting. So a lot of times anything you can do to kind of make the basic, if you have a lot of like basic shapes or undetailed pieces, adding something like this can actually add a little bit to your finished product. It can actually make it look kind of cool. Add a little tiny lip here. I don't know what this is, but it looks kind of cool. It also makes it look less like it was a something I just kind of found and more like something I made. I was trying to think about maybe I should add some screws down here, but that doesn't make a whole lot of sense about the way it'll all connect together. All right, I won't worry about that for now. Next thing I want to change is I realized something about this right here. So logically, if this slid back, it would overlap here a little bit, which doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to select that, bring it in here a little bit. So I have an idea about how oversized it actually kind of is. Go somewhere in between. There we go. Actually, let's move those both down here slightly. I also want to expand this up a little bit, like so. Loop this. There we go. Make it a little bigger, make it a little bit more interesting. Also thinking I should have at least one more of these down here. I'm not sure where it makes sense though. Oops. In the front maybe. Yeah, I could put it in the front. It'll be kind of potentially kind of cool looking. We'll note that all these bolts are temporary right now. They're not actually going to be printed with the final piece. They're just going to kind of be in here. So I have something to look at. There, I actually kind of like that. I like the way that looks. So if you select a part of vertices and hit Control L, it'll select everything linked to it. It's good for selecting pieces, larger object, or a set of objects. I'm going to rotate this around, slide it down here. That. There we go. That way a couple screws can actually go in the back also. So these will kind of look like the ones that are holding on some kind of mechanism for this here. So it all kind of makes sense. There we go. All right, one thing I don't like here is how kind of basic this piece right here looks. So I think I'm going to try to add something, some kind of detail to this right here, which might actually end up being a skull or something like that. All right, I'll worry about this for now. Let's do a, oops, not sure what I did there. Let's extrude this out a little bit. Add a little bevel to it. There we go. I don't know what it is, but it's kind of cool looking. Maybe this will even add a little hook to it so I can have it like loop around a belt. Add another piece here. There we go. Just a little something extra. I was remarking a little bit how much this is here starting to look like a Nerf gun, which I think is a little bit annoying, but that's okay. So I'm still trying to figure out if there's a better way to do this piece, but you know what? I'm going to leave it just as it is. It's fine for now. All right, we're going to add a couple bolts to the top. Maybe one here. One there, maybe. These ones could be smaller potentially. That could be fine. I don't think I like smaller on that. I'll have a large one here. So in theory that one will go straight through right there. going to separate this by selection. That gives me a kind of floating piece here. Turn off mirroring. Rotate it by 90 degrees. And I want to have it line up here at the center line. As much as possible. Oops. There we go. This is the boring part. Again, not talking much, but just a lot of little detail pieces that all kind of need to go in the same place. I'm going to extend this up here a little bit. Here's kind of a cool effect you can do. Like this. That kind of like embedded look like that is something that's kind of hard. It's a tough thing to do with like manual work. Like manual stuff. So it's kind of cool to include it with 3D printed stuff. With any kind of 3D printed work. It's something you can't quite achieve without having a 3D printer. It's still possible, but it's a very, very cool look. Now to figure out what to do with this part right here. So I've got this here, goes in right there. One thing I'm thinking of is this part feels like it's going to break off pretty easily, so I'm going to make it glue in a little deeper. Which means I'm also going to have to find the negative for that. Oh, there it is. There we go. So that way it'll have a little more room to glue in place. And that looks pretty good. God, this is still bothering me. This part looks terrible. I'm gonna fix it though. I'll fix it. Let's add a hole here. I don't know what these are, but there are just a couple little detail pieces right there. Maybe you would hang some kind of charms or wards there. Do the same thing here. Yep, I don't like that. Oops. Delete that. All right. Now let's do something with this piece right here. I think it's kind of boring looking. It's not very interesting. So let's find something for that.